Hey everybody, hopefully you meant to be in the energy track. It's 10 o'clock, so that's where we're at, and we're going to get going here. So our first presentation is energy efficiency at eBay with Lori Duvall, and I'm going to read a little bit about her. Lori Duvall is the Global Director of Green eBay. Lori uses her diverse background in environmental analysis, sustainable business strategy, and high technology to understand and drive improvements in eBay's environmental footprint. She's a big supporter of collaboration on sustainability issues and has served on a number of committees and advisory panels for groups such as Greenhouse Gas Protocol, Business Council on Climate Change, and Electronics Industry Citizenship Coalition. Before joining eBay, Lori was most recently the Director of Energy Solutions at SAP, and prior to that was with Sun Microsystems for 7 years, serving as their Senior Manager of Corporate Sustainability along with other roles. While at Sun, she led the creation of OpenEco.org, an online community focused on energy efficiency, greenhouse gas emissions reduction, and sustainable innovation. So if you give me a round of applause, welcome Lori.
Okay. Good morning. Morning. Thanks for having us. We really appreciate it. So I'm here to talk about energy efficiency at eBay, but also just energy in general, and give you some overview of where I sit in the company and how we kind of govern these things at eBay. If you're not tired of me by the end of the hour, I am also going to be talking at lunch a little bit about our kind of broader sustainability efforts with our green team. So watch this space. Let's see. Let me see if I can use this thing. All right, so essentially, just to give you an overview, we're going to be talking about, just give you kind of a really quick snapshot of eBay Incorporated. A lot of you, I'm sure, are familiar with eBay.com, but we actually are a quite a bit bigger company than that, and just kind of give you an idea of the scale we're working at. And also give you some context of what we call social innovation at eBay. I'm on the Global Social Innovation team. And that's a term that some companies use. I mean, it's one that we have started to use at eBay. It's a team that really came into being last year. So just kind of, because I know people often ask me, where do you sit in the company? How many people do you have? Want to kind of better understand how our sustainability efforts happen. And then really kind of diving down into what our environmental priorities and challenges are at eBay, and specifically talking about Utah. We have a significant presence here, and so I want to really kind of talk what is most local to you guys, and talk a little bit about the future and what we see for eBay and Utah in general in doing business here. So a lot of you guys, as I said, take this thing. eBay really is a multi-valued company. We have, eBay.com, which is what we at eBay call our marketplaces organization, and I'm sure many of you guys buy and sell on eBay, at least somebody, yeah. We also own PayPal. PayPal has been a part of eBay since 2002. It's a significant part of our business. They really are part of the foundation of the company. And then in 2011, we also bought a company called GSI Commerce. And GSI Commerce really took eBay. It's a great fit for our company and where we're going, but at the time it was a kind of big leap for us because GSI Commerce provides a range of services, including fulfillment services, for a lot of major brands. Companies like Toys R Us. You buy a toy from Toys R Us, when it comes in the mail, it comes from GSI Commerce. And so you can imagine that going from a company that's basically a platform with a website to a company that actually has large warehouses scattered all over the United States was a big step for us, and gave us some new challenges from an operational sustainability perspective. And of course, X.Commerce is really our developer platform, and that has been kind of rolled out over the last couple of years. If you want to get all geeky on the development platform, we can do that after the session. But in addition to these main elements, which comprise, what most of the people in the company work for these parts of eBay, but we also are a whole scat of other global brands. We both, one of our missions is to really enable consumers, or customers as I like to call them, to buy anything, anywhere, anyhow, including on their phones. But also, as I described with GSI, to give merchants the kind of services and support they need to go from, for instance, brick and mortar to having an online presence. So big company, eBay's about 30,000 employees worldwide now. Just a couple of years ago, we were about 15,000 employees, so you can imagine we've had some pretty interesting growing experiences. where I sit is called the Global Social Innovation Team. This is an eBay incorporated function that we have at the company. And really, we think about it as three major pillars. Economic opportunity, which is really a lot of where eBay's business has grown. I mean, our platform has enabled millions of people around the world to create businesses, to make a living. So that's a key part of our platform. And also powering giving. A lot of you guys, if you interact with PayPal, maybe have visited a site that lets you give at checkout, or a nonprofit that lets you, like the Red Cross, lets you give money through PayPal. Those are the kinds of tool sets that we also provide, in addition to our own philanthropic efforts through things like our eBay Foundation. So that's a very, if you think about corporate social responsibility in the old school term, we cover not just the environmental parts of things, but also the social side. And finally, enabling greener commerce, which is really my universe at eBay. And our aspirational statement for our group is to really be the leading global engine for greener commerce in the world. So I will freely admit that in some ways we know what that means. In other ways, part of our job is to figure out what it means for commerce to be greener. And some of that is some of the most exciting stuff I get to do in my job. It's really quite interesting. And certainly underlying all of this, and very important to us, and I'll talk a lot more about this at lunchtime, is this idea of engaging our employees. I mean, we can thank our employees at eBay for the fact that we have a green program at all. It really was their passion and their telling us that this is what matters to them. I mean, you saw Hunter's presentation this morning. You can see especially younger people, but a lot of people want to work for more responsible companies, and they want to do things in their own company to make it more environmentally responsible. So we try at every step, whether it's the greener side, whether it's on the give team side for our charitable work, engaging our employees is one of the major reasons that we're here. It's one of our major indicators of how we're doing in our programs. And finally, this idea of raising our voice outside the building. I mean, obviously, we have a lot of work to do inside the four walls of eBay, but we also, like my introduction said, I mean, I really believe in collaboration. There's a lot to be learned from other people. There's a lot of ways that you can take your ideas and put them in front of other people and help them stand on your shoulders rather than starting from ground zero. So this is kind of how we think about the work we do. And I just wanted to give you that context so you can see that I don't operate in just a silo of just doing, tree hugging stuff. We actually are trying to create a more integrated program at eBay. Looking really briefly at what our group is trying to do in greener commerce, we really have these kind of three major strategic priorities. One of them, and the one I'll spend the most time on today, is this idea of building the greenest platform. That's really where our operational stuff lives. We are a company of data centers and office buildings full of people and computers. And so obviously our most direct environmental impacts come from that. I'm going to spend most of my time talking about the buildings and the energy of the company, but also, as I mentioned with GSI Commerce and some other work we're doing, shipping is becoming a big issue. It used to be all we did was have a platform and some shipping happened between buyers and sellers on the platform, and we didn't really get involved. But more and more, that model is changing, and we're really trying to make the decisions we need to make up front to make that as sustainable as possible. Because at the end of the day, there's nothing particularly sustainable about a cardboard box. But there are measures you can take to lower the impact of shipping, and that's what we're exploring. We also look at sustainable commerce programs. And if you've followed the eBay in the news recently and some of the other interesting work that we're doing, we really believe that we have, through our business, the ability to do environmental good. Not just in running operations more cleanly, but doing things like partnering with Patagonia to encourage recycling and reuse of their products, as opposed to buying new ones. I mean, there have been studies to show, and we have certainly said it many times, that the greenest product is one that already exists. And so, as one of the biggest engines for reuse on the planet, we think eBay.com represents a really interesting opportunity for us. A more recent partnership we did was with the PGA Trade-In Network. Again, all about taking a very high-quality item that lasts a long time, like a golf club, and making sure that it actually has as long of a life as it can be. And so we're finding like-minded companies to do interesting programs like this in our platform, and that's a whole other discussion. And finally, I will talk a little bit about advocacy, because one of our biggest victories on the green side from an advocacy perspective was right here in Utah. So just to give you a sense of what kind of company is eBay and what are our environmental impacts. And again, to talk about inside the walls, if you're a greenhouse gas nerd, then it's scope 1, scope 2. Looking at where it comes from, not surprisingly, a big chunk of our energy is used by our data centers. We have a growing portfolio. It's growing as fast as those guys can build data centers, and we're highly aware of that. And our data centers are in places where the carbon intensity of the fuel supply is variable and often very high. So we're very sensitive to that. If you look also on the energy side, the other 37% is just all the other buildings we have, including a pretty large presence here in Utah. But if you look at carbon, what's also really interesting to me, and from year over year, work we've done in the data centers from 2010 to 2011 meant that their carbon emissions, even though their energy use increased, were kind of flat. It's the rest of the company that's actually getting to be a bigger and bigger percentage of our footprint, particularly when you go and buy gigantic distribution centers with conveyor belts that run 24 hours a day. That can be a pretty big part of your footprint. So the footprint is dynamically changing. I'm in the process of doing the 2012 inventory now. If any of you other guys report to the Carbon Disclosure Project, this is our carbon tax season that we're all doing. So I'll be very interested to see how these trends are shaping up from 2011 to 2012. And of course, we fly around a lot, and our executives who are lucky enough, they fly around a lot on a corporate jet. So that's really where our carbon emissions come from. So when you look at operations and obviously energy and carbon, I've been at eBay since October of 2011. And ever since I got there, obviously one of the biggest focus areas has been on energy and carbon, because that is our biggest impact. We spend a reasonable amount of money on energy every year. We've done some interesting projects on efficiency, but really we recognized that we really needed to prioritize and have a strategic point of view about what we were going to do with our energy use and carbon emissions. So from an energy perspective, our priorities are pretty straightforward, and they're not unique to us. A lot of people have these priorities. Obviously, efficiency, it's probably not just the first on the list, it's probably the first 5 on the list. Lots of different ways to do efficiency depending upon what part of the business you're in. On-site clean energy, these are a couple of pictures of installations we've already done. Those are our Bloom fuel cells that we have on our North Campus in San Jose. This is a solar installation that's sitting on top of our data center in South Jordan that's coming online. It's our biggest solar installation to date. It's our biggest renewable energy installation to date. So, and has obviously the best view of any, of our renewable energy installations. And then finally, on-site energy, we do that where it makes sense. And obviously for a business, making sense not only means you have the ground for it, but that you can make it make financial sense. Whether that's because you get help from subsidies in your local area from your utility to help the ROI work out better, whether that's wow, this is a really carbon intensive place and we need to seriously do something about that. We all about, in social innovation, in the programs we do, business impact is the first thing we look at. Social impact is the second thing. My job as a consultant to the business is to understand the business's priorities and work with them to make sure that we don't have to pick between being a greener or more responsible company and meeting our business objectives. That's the secret sauce. That's what everybody's trying to do. Does it work 100% of the time? Not always. Sometimes you do have to make some choices just to do the right thing. But in all cases, we always try to make it work out that way. And then from carbon, obviously carbon and energy are closely coupled. There's no way to really talk about one without the other. In addition to just all the work on energy we're doing, we as a company believe really strongly in being transparent about our carbon impacts. We've been reporting to the Carbon Disclosure Project, as Hunter mentioned, since 2006. So we were early adopters of that. Every year it gets more complicated. Every year our response gets more specific. We think that's an important exercise. We also want to hold ourselves to continuous improvement. And in a rapidly growing company, that's not always straightforward of how you do that. Oftentimes, you're looking at from a company that you want to have, of course, everybody wants to have an absolute carbon reduction goal. Everybody wants their carbon emissions to go in the other direction. But the fact is, you have to also use other tools like intensity metrics to measure performance, or like the same way you do with energy. So we're working very actively and are having very vigorous philosophical debates inside the company about what does continuous improvement mean? What are the meaningful metrics that we can put out there to show that we take this seriously and that we are making positive progress from a carbon perspective? And again, intensity reductions, which when I talk about the data centers, I'll be a lot more specific about what that means. So let's talk about eBay in Utah. So we've been here for about 12 years. Maybe it's 13 by now. We have about 1,500 employees in Draper. Most of those folks work in our customer support group, supporting eBay.com. So when you call customer support, oftentimes you will be talking to your fellow citizens in Draper. We do have plans, and this is out there in the press, of us trying to expand by another 2,200 employees over the next 20 years. And a key part of that will be this new facility we're building in Draper, which I will talk a little bit more about. which will give us the capacity to grow, is also going to be another one of the green buildings in our portfolio. We're very proud of that. And we also, in addition to what we have going on in Draper, we have some big buildings out there in South Jordan full of computers. Not too many staff, a few, but data centers are mostly things you plug in, not people. And as I'll talk about, we have another big data center on the way in that same site. Really, I mean, what's really exciting for me, I mean, even in the time that I have been at eBay, I mean, there's always been some really interesting things going on in Utah. The employees here are great. It's one of our biggest green teams we have in Draper. They have done everything from support local legislation to driving recycling programs to, really doing stuff that matters to them in the local community. They do a lot of great volunteer work. So they're very active and they're very, they keep us on our toes. They're always asking us to try harder and to work on this stuff with more intensity. So we really appreciate the input that we get from our employee green team. But over this time, over this period, I mean, even though it was already to that point, I mean, Utah is rapidly becoming really a center of excellence for the stuff that is really leading edge at eBay from as far as driving greener operations. And so that's what I'm going to basically spend the rest of my time here talking about is what we're doing here. Because Utah, we love doing business here, and it's really exciting for me to be able to have these innovative programs to talk to you about. So let's talk a little bit about legislation. There was this little bill that we helped get passed about, what's it been, about a year now? I mean, it took about a year and a half, 2 years to work its way to approval. But there's this bill called SB 12 here in Utah. And the reason SB 12 became necessary is, we moved here, we moved our data centers here and built the data center in South Jordan a few years ago. And while we've done amazing efficiency work, obviously moving into a pretty heavily coal-fired state meant the carbon emissions of our data center platform went way up. There was abundant good business reasons to move here. And if you had a list of 10 reasons to move here, 9 of them were absolutely positive. Carbon emissions, not so much. And so we said, of course, well, what we want to do in Utah is really prioritize renewable energy. As we discovered, there were rules on the books here in Utah that meant that it was illegal for a company to go to a third-party renewable energy developer and buy renewable energy. It wasn't because Rocky Mountain Power doesn't like, and if any of my friends from Rocky Mountain Power are here, hello, doesn't mean that they don't like renewable energy. It just, my understanding is those were laws that went back to the age of before there was a grid. And if you think about what you had to do to get a grid to happen, you had to have kind of rules about going through the utility to transmit power, et cetera. So identified this need, other people had tried to fix this problem before, but for various reasons it didn't happen. SB 12 came into being and we were finally successful. The key attributes, and these were essential to actually getting the legislation through. First of all, we had Rocky Mountain Power at the table. Obviously, if you have to use their infrastructure, you need to have them on board. You can't just go off and do things all by yourself. It was important to us and to our legislative sponsor that we provided these choices to companies to procure renewable energy, but not put a mandate on everybody in the state. And this also is associated with not passing on any costs for this program to the average ratepayer. I put organic tomatoes because this is something that Senator Madsen used a lot, which I liked, which was when you go to the grocery store, some people want to be able to buy organic tomatoes, and they'll be willing to pay what usually is a premium for organic tomatoes. But is it reasonable to expect everybody to buy organic tomatoes if they don't want to? No. So part of the legislation was to be very specific about where the payment for this legislation would come from. And also, we firmly believe, and so did Senator Madsen, that this really does open up job growth, not only from a renewable energy development perspective, but there are companies that have taken a look at Utah, but because they have these carbon objectives and because they're concerned about the fuel mix providing the electricity here, have kind of delayed or chosen not to come here. And so we really believe that now that these impediments are removed, this opens up a lot more opportunity, not just for us, but for other companies. What was in it for us? I mean, obviously it reinforces our commitment to greener operations. We were very sensitive about moving a very large energy consuming part of our enterprise to Utah, and we knew that people would be asking us questions, and we really wanted to turn that around and say, yeah, we understand we have challenges here, but this is why this is such a great place to do this work, because the ability to do good is so powerful. We also, we have issues with long-term energy costs. I mean, of course, we're getting a pretty attractive rate now on our energy, but What's going to happen when the gas bubble bursts? What's going to happen down the road if more climate regulation comes into being and coal goes out of the cycle faster and faster? As a company that uses more and more energy all the time, this is of concern to us. Of course, we want to minimize the environmental impacts, not just greenhouse gases, but those pictures that you saw, of the air quality here in Utah. I mean, I grew up in Colorado, and Denver has a somewhat similar issue, especially in the wintertime. So we're concerned not just about greenhouse gases, but the environment in general for our employees and the communities in which we operate. And finally, just, again, opening this door for other businesses to do business here and also meet their sustainability objectives. So just briefly to talk about the coalition, Senator Mark Madsen from District 13, excellent legislative sponsor, really passionate about this issue, was a great partner for us. Of course, Rocky Mountain Power, very, very important. And then, of course, there's also this group that the head of our data center practice helped found that we are deeply involved with called Data Center Pulse. It's really an organization of data center operators where they compare notes and talk about their challenges. Data Center Pulse was very much behind this because it could bring to the table not just us as a data center operator, but a lot of the bigger internet companies and other companies that have large IT footprints. And finally, we got some exceptional help from both some local renewable energy developers and also Utah Clean Energy. I think there's some folks from Utah Clean Energy running around here today, and big help. And both, and if I was to talk about, what made this successful, really getting the right people at the table, making sure you understand the landscape, making sure you understand what matters to the electeds here in the state. We did a session at the BSR conference this year with our government relations team talking about what you could learn from this experience. And so, if anybody's interested in having a little bit more information about how SB 12 happened, we're happy to share that with you guys, because we would like very much for other people to be able to use that as a model, because Utah is not unique in some of the impediments to renewable energy development. So let's talk a little bit about our data center in South Jordan. We call it Topaz because that was its code name, and the thing about companies is once you call somebody something inside the company, sometimes that persists. So right now we call it Project Topaz, and at the time when Topaz opened, that was 2011? Topaz opened? 2010. 2010, 2011. It was LEED Gold certified. Now that was before LEED had a data center standard. This is LEED Gold certified under new construction. Has a lot of attributes that made it that way, and really we learned a lot. I mean, people don't typically think about data centers as green buildings, but there's a lot of things you can do in the green building context that really helps you with efficiency down the road. I mean, these are just, any of you guys who are familiar with LEED, this is the kind of stuff you concern yourself with when you're doing new construction. This idea of, and of course data centers, as some people may not know, data centers use a lot of water in addition to a lot of power. And there's a lot of chemicals that can be involved because it's for the cooling system. They use a lot of chemicals to make sure the water is okay and doesn't muck up the system. Well, now there's really good technology for not using chemicals to do that. And so we're really, again, other environmental concerns beyond just energy and carbon. Excellent ventilation design, and the solar array that I spoke about, which is 665 kilowatts, our largest installation to date until, about 6 months from now. Then we'll have a much bigger renewable energy installation. And just, I know people love the ROI stuff. 15 million kilowatt hours a year, that's not a bad thing. About $870,000 in annual energy costs, which is significant even for a portfolio our size. With some help from Rocky Mountain Power, originally the payback was about 4.5 years on these efficiency improvements. Rocky Mountain Power came in and assessed the construction and assessed what we were doing. They were generous enough to provide us with some incentives, so we took our ROI down to 2.5 years. 2.1 years. So it's already paid for. We're very happy about that. It's kind of an epic, it's really hard to take a good picture of a data center because it tends to be just a big building with no windows. So that's about as arty as it's going to get. This one's more of an inside picture of one of our data centers in Arizona. But one of the cool things about Topaz not only was just an achievement unto itself, but what we learned and how we could apply that to this kind of radical efficiency program that has been put in place by our data center team. I have some factoids, and I would like to look them up because they're super cool. Let me just give you a couple of these factoids. Talking about this alignment of facilities and IT is important. I know some of you guys, if you work inside of companies, very often the people who use the power are not the people who pay the bill. or the people that build the building are not the people who support and purchase the IT that goes inside the building. And that, in and of itself, can often be like your biggest achievement when you take a job like mine in a company is like, hey, I got real estate and finance to talk to each other about the power bill. Yay! Take your victories where you can. But the fact that our data center team both builds the buildings and procures the IT and operates the data center, 50% reduction in capital and operating costs, because we just understand it. We see it as a whole system. Huge, huge opportunity for improvement. Ability to look into the future with the building and think about what you want to do in the portfolio from an IT perspective. Very, very valuable, huge payback. This idea of modular design, when you're a company like us, in the old days, you would buy a data center, you'd put in a bunch of racks, and you'd bolt the equipment in there, and it'd be stuck to the floor. Now they've innovated things like, we call it rack and roll, where you basically get entire racks of equipment and just slide it into the center already configured and plug it in. That way you could move things around from floor to floor, from side to side. Really gives the building some persistence, because oftentimes people would build these data centers, 2 years later they outgrow it, they have to move somewhere else, and they tear the other one down. Not cool, not a good way to spend your money. And really some of the most exciting stuff beyond the infrastructure, because boy, we could get really geeky on all the stuff they do in the data center to be efficient, and all the cool innovative stuff. So if there's any data center geeks in the audience, I can lay all kinds of stuff on you, and we can get really wacky with that. But this idea of metrics innovation, because obviously a lot of us who are in this business, it's not like we don't know what some of these measures are we can take, but getting the data to actually support those decisions, getting the data to do the kind of analysis that you need to know if you're making the right decision, is really, really hard. And you can have the best software tools in the universe, but if you don't use them right and they're not plugged into the right thing, you're still kind of mucking around in the dark. You're just running into more expensive software as you do it. And so we have done an enormous amount of work, both technologically. 5 years ago, you were doing well to kind of monitor a rack or a row in a data center for power consumption. Now you can get down not only to the machine level, but to the CPU level inside the machine and know exactly how much traffic it's using, exactly how much energy it's using, exactly what it was doing when it used that energy. And so we have done a lot of work in the last couple of years to come up with this metric that is going to be officially rolled out next week. But essentially what that's going to enable us to do is not only show people what it takes from an energy perspective or a carbon perspective to do a purchase on eBay.com, but also be able to start feeding that back into the people who build the platform in the first place. And that's really back to the code level, to be, obviously platforms like eBay run on software, and we got a bunch of people who their whole job is to write software. And when we can get down to the process level inside of our data centers and see, wow, if they would just reduce the memory cache size by 25%, that would save us $10 million in servers in the next year, because we won't have to use them, we have to buy them because we don't need the capacity. So this is the kind of stuff that, 5 or 8 years ago, our head of data centers and I were working at Sun Microsystems, and we wanted to do this, but it was just not possible. Now it's possible. So we're going to be rolling out some pretty interesting, not only this metric, but also some goals based on that. And that's going to, we believe, actually change the face of data centers as far as making them more sustainable into the future. So we're really excited about that. And I'm looking forward to the next couple of weeks. So what's coming next in Utah? To stick on data centers, so we've got a big footprint out there in South Jordan. And right next door, we're building another data center. We call this Project Quicksilver. You can see they kind of like elemental references in the data center team. Quicksilver was on the books a year ago. We knew we were going to build it. And we thought, well, are we just going to build another carbon copy of Topaz and put it right next door and have all the, I don't know if you know how much you know about data centers, but in addition to all those computers, you have a whole floor full of batteries and uninterrupted power supplies and all of this kit and backup generators, all of these things. Most of the time you use it 1% a year if you use it at all, but you have to put it there just in case you need it. But we had kind of a radical idea that happened last spring, really. It was this idea of, well, what if you didn't have to power the data center off the grid? What if you could put in an on-site power source that would power the data center, use the grid as backup? And that's what we're doing with Project Quicksilver. Project Quicksilver will be the first data center that is run 100% from on-site clean energy. And we are very happy about that. If I showed you the side-by-side between Topaz and Quicksilver, you'll see that the footprint of the building itself went down significantly. There was a lot of upfront savings from making this choice because we didn't have to buy all those UPSs, all those batteries, all those backup generators. Now we got the grid. If the fuel cells go down, well, we just turn the grid on. It's really okay. So what a Bloom fuel cell is, who knows about Bloom fuel cells? You know what those are? They basically, in essence, and they've got a great website with a little cartoon and everything, shows you how a Bloom box, we call them Bloom boxes, most people do. They basically take natural gas as an input, and instead of combusting it, they actually do a chemical reaction that produces heat, which then produces electricity. Doesn't mean they're zero emissions, but they're significantly lower than using grid power. And they basically, we're going to put 6 megawatts of them, you know, on this data center. And to just give you a sense of our challenges, we'll be using that 6 megawatts as soon as we turn it on, because you know we've also got Topaz on that same site. But really exciting. At the time that we announced this, it was the biggest non-utility fuel cell installation ever. I think maybe there's been a couple announcements since then where people, you know, I hope we had something to do with these announcements that came after us and said, well, they're doing 6 megawatts, we're going to do 7. Good. We want people to try to do better than us because we're really excited about the leaps that we're taking. But this data center is under construction right now. We expect this thing to come online probably in the third quarter this year. But it will be really an interesting case, and it will, you know, this has been an interesting experience both from a learning perspective of what's possible, and it's going to be really exciting to actually see it come online. So I'm sure it will hit the local news somewhere. But let's look at what else we're doing in Utah. I mean, you know, we've done some green building at eBay. Every green building every building we've built since I think 2008 has been a LEED certified building. The new building, this is a picture of from the roof of the new Draper facility that we're building, and that one should be open in the next couple of months. We're excited. We get a walkthrough today. It should be pretty cool. Certified LEED Gold building. We have purchased 100% renewable power for this building so that it will not have that impact. Like I mentioned, we do have the big solar installation in South Jordan, which is in the middle of commissioning right now, so that should be coming online in the next month or two. Project Quicksilver with our fuel cells. In addition, on top of that, I mean, you know, I was ecstatic and amazed and thrilled that eBay was brave enough at the management level to decide to do this Bloom project. But then they also said, well, but that's not the whole footprint, right? That's not all the energy you need, right? So the data center team now has gone out, and we've gone through a procurement process over the last few months to try to find another 20 megawatts of renewable energy for our operations in Utah. So we are in the throes of actually talking to the bidders and going through all of this stuff and trying to make the right choice. But you know, as soon as we bring that online, I mean, right now we're at about 2 megawatts renewable, including all the solar we have, all the fuel cells we have, and everything. Ultimately, by 2015, we very well could have 28 megawatts of renewable energy in our portfolio. And that's a pretty big jump in 3 or 4 years. So super exciting, and really exciting that it's going on here. Because we really believe that this is completely possible. This is not, you know, this is effort, but it's not magic. It can happen, and so I guess one of my biggest messages I wanted to convey to people is that, you know, we don't have to be like Hunter was talking about this morning, you know, kind of nibbling around the edges here. You know, you do have the ability to actually sometimes make giant leaps. And it's scary, and there's a lot of stuff that is still out there about renewable energy, like from a carbon accounting perspective, that people are still trying to figure out and all of these things. But, you know, we're not the only one. Companies aren't waiting. You know, we're not waiting for the government to come and tell people that they have to have a renewable portfolio standard. And we're not waiting to have somebody mandate that the energy supply get cleaner. You know, lots of companies are already moving forward, whether it's the Walmarts of the world, whether it's us, whether it's Kohl's. Lots of companies have decided that it's worth making the effort and doing the business case to get renewable energy faster. And so really, really exciting, fun stuff. I have a good job. So, I mean, that's a whirlwind tour, and I was careful to leave time because I can get geeky on all sorts of these things. And I'm not really sure who's in the room, but I have a feeling we've got a real mix of students and academics and NGOs and private sector. So I'm happy to just talk about any of the things I talked about, or if you just have other questions about eBay or sustainability, you know, I may not be able to answer, but I'll give it my best shot. You, sir. In Draper, yes, 400. We have 3,000 worldwide. what we do is we are fortunate enough that we actually have someone on our team whose job is employee engagement, and he is really instrumental in helping these teams be something. Like in all of these areas where we have these green teams, we have green team leaders that do we approve them? No, but we kind of cultivate them. We don't just randomly pick people. We actually try to find somebody who's going to give that team that kind of leadership. And then we're fortunate enough to be able to provide very modest, but some seed funding for those teams to do projects that are local, like community gardens they put in Omaha, for instance, or window film on the building in Arizona, or things like that really are specifically local. So we do build this community of the green team leaders. We do bring them together once a year for a summit from all over the world, because they're in Europe and they're in Israel and all over the place. Kind of get them psyched up, kind of give them a context of what we as the business are trying to do, and then hopefully give them some guidance as they think about projects. I mean, a lot of what we do, and so I think part of our success has been both, really paying attention to them and really trying to connect them back into the main team, but also really trying to connect them into the parts of the business like workplace resources that are already doing this as their day job and make them additive. That's always a challenge with a green team, right? I mean, you've got a lot of excited employees and they all believe in the planet and they want to do something helpful, but they're not really sure what to do. Or they're trying to solve the same problem that this office over here just solved, and so we try to kind of help them be additive. Our green team, for instance, in San Jose, I mean, the workplace resources team runs an extensive and very effective zero waste program, but the green team was kind of instrumental in making that happen. None of our employees in San Jose have trash cans under their desks. They only have recycle and compost, for instance. And frankly, we need those employee champions, because for every employee champion, you've got, 24 kvetchers who are not part of the green team. So they're good ambassadors for us. Anybody else? You were next. So from the data center side, what we're shooting for, I think I'm okay to kind of high level this. That's my communications person right there, so I keep looking at her. We really are looking at a multidimensional thing. We're looking at how much work from a transactional perspective or per a server do we get out of our data center? How much revenue do we get because obviously that's a big interest to the business, and making sure that platform is as effective as possible. And also from the environmental perspective, looking at intensity from a carbon perspective and seeing those numbers go down. But we also are trying to integrate into this metric, and will be this idea of how much of our power is coming from the grid, how much of it is being provided by owned clean energy of one kind or another. So it is kind of this multidimensional way. I mean, the guy, the head of the data center team likes to talk about it as a Rubik's Cube, but we're not really licensed to talk about it as a Rubik's Cube, but that's how he thinks about it. I think in the sense that you can turn it all different ways and you get a different view, but it's still always the same thing all bundled up into this one set of metrics. So we actually, we also talk about it as sort of like, the instrument panel on your car. You've got this dashboard and you want to see how close to 50 miles per gallon you're getting, if that's your target, and see where you're out of compliance. I mean, data centers have had for years this idea of metrics that come from a group called the Green Grid, and there's PUE, power usage effectiveness, which got us a long way. I mean, PUE didn't exist 5 years ago, and that's essentially the ratio of how much compute electricity you're using versus how much electricity for everything else, air conditioning, networking, lighting. And 5 or 6 years ago, a PUE near 2 was pretty typical. And I mean, that's nightmarish. You've got 1 watt of computing and 2 watts of air conditioning. Now PUE targets are getting down below 1.5, 1.3. We've measured PUEs down in that range for our data centers sitting on top of the building in Phoenix in the middle of the summer. We're still getting PUEs, and we're getting free cooling, another whole innovation, from 115 degrees Fahrenheit outside. So they also have WE, water usage effectiveness, and CUE, carbon usage effectiveness, that same kind of measure. But those are pretty blunt instrument measurements of the data center as a whole. And this metric that we're adding into that world is one that really helps you get down to the process level. Because internet companies like us have that's been a lack that we've had. It's been how do you tell all these tunings you're doing when you have 200,000 servers How can you tell when you do this tweak that you're actually having that effect? And measuring the building's overall PUE is not going to necessarily get you there. So, you, sir. Thank you. Yep. It's about half in Utah. It's actually less than half, I think. But it's natural gas. And then, of course, our objective is to find a way to zero out the rest of the carbon for that. And part of what we're working on, I mean, a classic way people do that is biogas procurement. If you run off biogas is one way. Highly certified RECs or carbon offsets are another way. But we're really pleased that, when you're going from, say, 850 kilograms per megawatt hour coming off the grid to something 30 or 50% less than that, that's a pretty big chunk from the beginning. So, was there one over here? Oh, way back in the cheap seats. Oh, I know I keep looking this way. I just want to be sure if there's anybody over here. Yep. So like I said, in San Jose, I mean, we are fortunate in that we operate in a municipality that has extensive recycling, composting, and waste infrastructure. And I, by no means, I recognize that not every place is like that. And we do businesses in places where you're lucky to get aluminum recycling. But we do try to encourage that. We do try to find options with our waste haulers in other jurisdictions. I mean, like I said, in San Jose, it was not without a certain amount of pushback that they got rid of the trash cans. That's not atypical in the Bay Area, but it is in a lot of other places. And the idea, it's not like you can't throw trash away, but you have to actually walk to the break room to do it. Because we can do, we have a waste hauler that does composting of our cafe waste and all of the compostables, but we also have an on-site composter on the campuses that does a certain amount of composting that we then use that compost in our landscaping. But in other places, we find, first we look at the limits of what the local jurisdiction allows and try to maximize that. Leased property is a challenge. We are starting to look at our biggest leased property in our portfolio and try to see what we can do with the landlords to improve those situations, because often it's really not our choice. And whereas in the data center portfolio, I'm moving more and more towards owned facilities because of this idea of control and being able to really maximize efficiency. The real estate portfolio for the offices is going the exact opposite direction. More and more leased property, partially because we just grow so fast. And as leased property gets into the portfolio, my data quality goes down. So that's a challenge. Doesn't mean we're not going to rise above. And as far as like transit, we actually have a group in Workplace Resources that really focuses on incentives for employees to not drive single occupant vehicles. In the Bay Area, we have a lot of employees that, believe it or not, live in San Francisco and work in San Jose. We have a shuttle that we run from San Francisco to San Jose. Last year, it was something on the order of about 40,000 round trips that those shuttles did. So if you think about all those single occupancy vehicles that are not happening from San Francisco to San Jose, never mind the fact we've got intense parking problems. So that's essential for us. But they also, in that program, they offer incentives for bicycle commuters. Our sites, most of our big campuses have showers, lockers, bike lockers to support that. Certainly when we cited our green buildings like Draper, we looked at transit access because we really do want our employees not to be compelled to drive. Doesn't work everywhere, but we try to find those places. We also provide, if there's infrastructure in the community for things like commuter checks, in the bigger municipalities, maybe you have those here in Utah, we do subsidize commuter checks. Yeah, but the fact is, especially in the United States, culturally, getting people not to drive their own car to work is really a challenge. And I've spent a lot of my career in various ways trying to figure that one out. But getting them closer to trains and other things seems to be more effective than trying to support carpooling, even though we do that as well. And we did actually, finally, even this year, we even put in a few electric vehicle charging stations, so our employees who need that emergency charge can get home at night. So we're always continually trying to make those programs more effective because parking is expensive, and we don't want to have to keep building parking lots and parking garages and attracting more single occupant vehicles. Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, I mean, lots of the really cool things that laid the foundation for the work I do now, that happened way before I got to eBay. And a lot of it was like this beautiful garden of mushrooms that just popped up and people believed in it and they made it happen. What I think we've really done by having this strategic point of view and enable people to understand what our priorities are is to be able to say no, but, or say, sometimes the messaging is, I understand that's really important to you. Here's a group that already did it. You guys talk amongst yourselves and maybe make that happen. If it's a bigger change, like getting rid of trash cans, it's important to have those metrics up front and explain to people, I understand this is something new you're going to have to learn to do, but let me tell you what would happen if we didn't do this. And let me tell you, not just environmentally, because not everybody's a true believer. I don't expect everybody to be a tree hugger. But I do expect if you can give people financial reasons or quality of life reasons, it's good to know that. I mean, here in Utah, SB 12 was a wonderful example. Of course, some of us were ecstatic about it from an environmental perspective, and we really believe it really has the ability to move the needle. But, that message doesn't really fly necessarily, even in front of legislators. And so you really have to have other reasons. You have to be able to tell that story to the audience. You have to understand who you're talking to and what they care about. And certainly when I go about my business, and a lot of what I do is try to influence what other teams do in the company. It really is first understanding what their objectives are and what their goals are, and really taking the time to understand them before you come in and say, I want you to do this new program because it's good for the environment. But if you can understand what they're trying to do, in the perfect world, you get both of those things. Like I said, you can help them meet their business objectives. Ideally, you're not getting in the way, but in a beautiful world, you're actually making them have bigger impacts from a business perspective. So, I guess the biggest guidance I could say is know your audience, but also, if nobody can do everything in a company or a school or anywhere. There's a zillion things we could do to make eBay greener. We have to be able to show what are our biggest material impacts and prioritize those. And I have no problem, and I frequently help out other teams to use the data to kindly explain why we're doing this and not that. It's always good, instead of just, we don't just say no, but we like to have good reasons and be thoughtful, because oftentimes you give people those reasons and your logic, and they'll come back and say, but have you considered this? No, I actually didn't consider that. Thank you very much. I will add that to the argument, rather than, our job is not to go around bossing people around. That is, in a beautiful world, I could be a dictator and I could just tell people what to do and how to spend their money. But that's just not how these jobs happen. It really is building those relationships with people and being able to speak to them in their own vocabulary, their own language. I guess I have time for maybe one more. Well, I am certainly not a policy expert, and I wouldn't dream of making policy recommendations. But what I do know is there are states where it's easier to do this stuff. And there are states where utilities are incented, for instance, to sell less of their product in a decoupled market. That's not, we've had that in California for a long time, and if you look at the chart in California of per capita energy use, even though the population has grown, per capita energy use is flat. And the reason that is companies like Pacific Gas and Electric are actually incented to tell people not to use their product. In other places, that's not the case. And so I think that's an important vehicle, particularly when you're trying to do building-related efficiency projects, green building. That just greases the wheels. There are other things. There's certainly plenty of learned people from a policy perspective that can show what moves in the utility sector you can do to make it easier to do business. Incentives are nice, but nobody can count on incentives. Incentives are like your bonus you might get at the end of the year. You don't know what's coming. If you get it, great, it's gravy. But you have to try to make this thing work without incentives. And I know that's a very, we don't want the government to be in the business of just giving handouts, but we do want them to make investments that make sense and actually help companies like us meet our objectives. And I know that's really vague, but that's kind of my remit. But I think that you can look in other states or look at what California, and I know California, people kind of go, all the fruits and nuts are in California. But there has been some really aggressive policy work that's happened in California over the last several decades that have tended to set precedent for things like the Clean Air Act. And there are policy instruments that work. Policy is not a be-all and end-all of everything, but it's pretty essential if you really want to move things more quickly. Again, businesses are moving forward anyway, but there are things people could do who, both on the legislative side, large utilities, jurisdictions, that could just get the impediments out of the way. I mean, students ask me sometimes, they talk a lot about policy and they tend to talk about the federal government, but you look at SB 12, fantastic example of state-level work, really understanding the legislative landscape and the challenges and doing that really tough, you know, at the meeting for 2 years, talking to all the people you need to. At the local level, there's a lot of stuff within your own community that, you know, local policy is messy. It's not as grand and doesn't get put in the federal register, but there's just tons of that kind of stuff where you don't realize that one of the reasons people aren't doing something is there's some dorky law in the books from 40 years ago that's getting in their way. So I highly always encourage people who have that policy bent and want to have sustainability work to look below the federal level and really start digging in, because oftentimes, yeah, it is a local effect, but it provides models for other communities to use as well. I think I'm out of time, right? Timekeeper? That clock's a little bit fast, but I think I'm done. Thank you. I appreciate it.